What if the last trace of an entire colony was not silence but a signal? For most people, the story of Roanoke ends with an empty settlement and a single word carved into weathered wood, a mystery frozen in time, explained away by theories of hunger, conflict, or migration. But what if that silence wasn't the ending? What if, before the world forgot them, the colonists left behind something more, a message carried beyond walls and forests, reaching across centuries like an echo that refuses to fade? Tonight we will step into that shadow. Not the version written in history books, but the version whispered in reports, in folklore, and in encounters too strange to dismiss. A version where the colony didn't simply vanish, it tried to speak one final time. Because if history remembers only silence, then where did this final signal come from? And perhaps the more unsettling question is, why does it still linger waiting for someone to listen? Now let us return to the beginning, to the colony itself, and the moment its voice was lost. In the late 16th century, the English crown dreamed of expanding its reach across the Atlantic. The chosen site was a narrow strip of land now known as Roanoke Island, resting quietly off the coast of present-day North Carolina. To the ambitious backers in London, it was a foothold into the New World. To the settlers who made the journey, it was both promise and peril, a chance to begin again, shadowed by the unknown forests that stretched endlessly inland. At first, the settlement resembled any other outpost of human hope. Rough cabins lined the clearing, smoke curled upward from makeshift hearths. Children's laughter broke against the low roar of waves, and above it all, the figure of Governor John White, an artist turned leader, tried to balance vision with survival. His sketches, even now, give us glimpses of those early days: houses built of timber, fortifications hammered into the sand, crops planted with careful optimism. Yet survival was never simple. Supplies dwindled, relations with nearby tribes faltered, and the looming Atlantic made resupply a gamble of seasons. In 1587, when John White sailed back to England to secure aid, he promised his people that he would return swiftly. Instead, war with Spain delayed him for 3 long years. When at last White returned, the year was 1590. The settlement stood silent, no footsteps in the sand, no smoke rising. Cabins were weather-worn, their doors hanging open to the salt air. The place was not destroyed, not abandoned in panic, but emptied with an unsettling orderliness. The only sign left behind was a single word carved into a wooden post: CROATOAN. Imagine the moment: White stepping ashore, his boots pressing into the same soil where families once thrived. The wind carrying nothing but gull cries and the creak of deserted structures. He searched desperately. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no evidence of fire or disease, just absence. An entire community gone, as though lifted from the earth by invisible hands. Historians would later argue over the meaning. Perhaps the colonists sought shelter with the CROATOAN tribe, migrating southward. Perhaps they starved and drifted inland. Each theory offers rational comfort, yet none explain why the colony left no trace. No letters, no belongings, not even graves. For John White, the search became unbearable. Storms forced him away before he could reach CROATOAN Island, and he never saw his family again. His daughter, his granddaughter Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World, vanished with the others into history's shadows. We are taught this as the neat ending of Roanoke, a failure of colonization, another unsolved footnote in the long ledger of empire. But there is something about the silence of the site that lingers, too complete, too deliberate, as though absence itself was the message. And yet, not every account accepts silence as the final word. There were whispers among sailors, fragments of testimony buried in logs, and folklore that grew like roots beneath the official story. Some claimed the colonists had left behind something not carved into wood, but carried through the air, a signal meant to outlast time. Because if the colony truly vanished without a trace, why did generations after still insist they heard its final call? Not long after the disappearance of the Roanoke colony, rumors began to drift across the waves like smoke refusing to disperse. Sailors docked along the outer banks spoke in low voices of hearing strange sounds as they approached the island, not the natural rhythm of surf and wind, but something out of place. Some described it as a steady drumming, like the echo of wooden mallets against hollow logs. Others swore it was voices, faint and fractured, carried on the night air. The reports were always similar. When the men strained to listen, the sound seemed to retreat, as if it were aware of being noticed. For locals and fishermen, the whispers became part of the coastline itself. Standing on the shore after sunset, some claimed they could hear rhythmic cries pulsing in the distance, as though an unseen crowd were calling across the water. A few spoke of flashes of firelight beyond the tree line, only to find nothing when they dared to search. The island had become a place where sound seemed to misbehave, slipping between the natural and the unnatural. Even explorers tasked with mapping the region recorded oddities. One note, attributed to a soldier years after White's return, described the beating of drums upon the air, though no tribe could be found. Another sailor recalled seeing a signal fire, a column of smoke rising from the woods. But when a search party arrived, the clearing was cold, the earth untouched by flame. Folklore wove itself quickly around these accounts. Some said the colonists had indeed survived, but had been changed. Their voices stretched thin, caught forever in the winds that coiled through the pines. Others whispered that the signal was no human cry at all, but something older, an ancient force using the vanished colony as its mouthpiece. If the island called out, it was not asking for help. It was warning others to stay away. The stories blurred the line between truth and myth. Were the sounds the final attempts of desperate people carving a message not into wood but into air itself? Or were they something darker, a mimicry meant to lure the living toward the same fate? What unsettles most is the consistency. How generation after generation in different words described the same auditory unease. Centuries later, in the quiet of modern research, fragments of these reports still linger in archives and regional histories. They do not stand as official evidence, but they remain as shadows of what people believed they encountered. And belief, as history often shows us, can be just as enduring as fact. So we must ask, if there truly was a signal, whether carved into the air through drums or whispered through the shifting wind, who was it meant for? Was it a plea for rescue? A code to guide loved ones home? Or was it never meant to be heard by us at all? Perhaps the more unsettling mystery is not what was heard, but why those who heard it chose to walk away. Who first dared to listen, and why was their testimony so easily ignored? In the years following John White's desperate search, a different kind of story began to take root along the Atlantic coast. It was not written in official reports or neatly catalogued in letters to the Crown, but passed between sailors, settlers, and locals who claimed they had felt something strange when they neared Roanoke. These were not tales of empty cabins or carved words. These were accounts of sound, fleeting, unnatural, and impossible to place. Some swore that on still nights they heard the roll of drums echoing across the water. Not the lively rhythm of tribal celebrations, but a slow, hollow pounding, as if someone far away was striking a warning. Others told of voices carried on the wind, faint, broken syllables that never formed complete words, yet felt urgent, almost pleading. The more men strained to listen, the more the voices seemed to slip away, teasing the boundary between reality and imagination. Fishermen said the island itself seemed alive with whispers. Nets dropped into the surf tangled in ways they could not explain, as though pulled by unseen hands. While mending lines on quiet beaches, they would pause, sure they had heard children laughing just behind the dunes. When they turned, there was nothing but swaying grass. A handful of travelers insisted they saw signal fires glowing deep in the trees, guiding lights in the darkness, only for those same clearings to be cold and untouched when they arrived. With time, folklore wrapped itself around these experiences like creeping ivy. Some claimed the colonists had survived, their voices woven permanently into the wind, their signal forever replaying to anyone who dared approach. Others believed the opposite, that whatever consumed them had left behind an imitation, a cruel echo designed not to call for help, but to lure the curious into the same fate. If that were true, then the final signal was not a plea. It was a warning disguised as one. The consistency of these accounts is what unsettles most. Decade after decade, generation after generation, strangers reported the same unnatural sounds. Drums where no drummers stood, voices where no speakers lived, fires where no fuel had burned. Such repetition forces us to ask, were they all imagining the same thing? Or were they all brushing against a truth too fragile to be documented? And if this truly was the colony's last message, what did it mean? A code for the lost? A call for aid that never came? Or something never intended for human ears? The mystery deepens when we consider this. Many who first reported the sounds quickly fell silent, their stories buried in journals, dismissed in taverns, or simply ignored by leaders who saw no benefit in chasing ghosts. Which leaves us with the most haunting question of all. Who first heard this final signal, and why was their warning so easily forgotten? When the colony of Roanoke was first declared lost, the English crown demanded answers. Ships continued to patrol the coast, and explorers, men who charted the edges of the New World, recorded what little they saw. It is within their testimonies that fragments of something darker emerge. One such account came from a sailor whose name appears in scattered correspondence. He claimed that while anchoring near the island, his crew saw a flickering light within the tree line, as if torches were being raised in silent formation. They assumed survivors had signaled them, but by the time they rowed ashore, the clearing lay cold, untouched. No footprints in the sand, no ash on the ground. Only the unsettling hush of an island that seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. Another explorer spoke of cries at night, voices that echoed across the water with eerie precision. He described them as English, yet strangely distorted, as if filtered through the forest itself. His companions dismissed it as imagination, but he recorded the detail in his journal, unwilling to let the memory dissolve. It was them, he wrote, or what remains of them. Stories such as these never reached official reports in full. Some were whispered among sailors over rum, too unsettling to risk ridicule. Others appeared in private diaries, where the men allowed themselves honesty that duty forbade. And yet, across the scattered notes, one theme repeats. Signals that seem to originate from Roanoke, answered by silence when pursued. There are mentions, too, of strange fires at sea. A ship recorded an orange glow rising above the coastline, steady like a beacon. The crew believed it to be a distress fire guiding them toward the missing colonists. But as they neared, the glow faded, dissolving into mist, leaving behind nothing but the relentless crash of waves. Imagine the torment of those men. They had been told to find answers, to recover the lost settlement, to bring news home to England. Instead, what they found was suggestion without substance. Signals that appeared only when unobserved, vanishing when approached. Like echoes, they could never hold them. Historians today often dismiss these accounts as superstition, yet to discard them entirely is to overlook the consistency. Independent men in different years recorded the same phenomena: light, sound, movement that dissolved into nothingness. Were they all deceived by storms, wind, and firelight? Or were they brushing against a truth they dared not put plainly into words? If the colonists had truly perished, the island should have been silent. Instead, explorers reported a presence, not life, not death, but something caught in between. The idea of a final signal is no longer so implausible when seen through their eyes. And yet, one question lingers in the margins of their notes. If the signals were real, why were they ignored? Why did those who heard the cries, who saw the fires, retreat into silence of their own?
Perhaps they feared what they had touched.
Perhaps they understood that whatever message lingered on Roanoke was not meant to be followed. But what if the signal never ceased, shifting, adapting, reaching out across centuries? The explorers' voices fade, but the echoes remain. And in time, those echoes began to evolve. Long after the explorers' journals closed and the English crown turned its attention elsewhere, Roanoke did not rest quietly. The absence of its colony became a story carried through generations, and with it, the murmurs of something still lingering. Sailors along the Outer Banks began to call the stretch of coast haunted waters, a place where ships creaked with unease and crews reported disturbances that could not be traced to weather or tide. Fishermen in the 17th century spoke of phantom fires glowing on the horizon. They swore they saw entire camps illuminated in the dark, only to find empty shores the next morning. Some described hearing voices drifting across the waves, not in English, not in Algonquian, but in a broken cadence that felt both familiar and alien. For them, Roanoke was not abandoned. It was alive in a way that was unsettled. As centuries passed, the signal seemed to shift form, adapting to new ears. In the 1800s, travelers told of eerie melodies echoing from the island at night, as though wind moved through invisible instruments. Locals claimed these sounds were strongest on anniversaries of the colony's founding and disappearance, as if time itself marked the memory. By the early 20th century, technology entered the story. Amateur radio operators reported bursts of unexplained static while tuning near the coastal frequencies. Some even claimed to catch fragments of voices, weak, distorted, fading before identification. One operator wrote that it sounded like a call cut short, a transmission with no origin. Though dismissed as interference, the reports mirrored the same pattern, a presence trying to reach beyond silence, never allowing the mystery to settle. Folklore and fact blurred further as stories spread inland. Campfire tales spoke of travelers lost in the Carolina woods, guided astray by rhythmic sounds like distant drums. Others told of lights that moved through the trees, always just beyond reach. No matter how far removed from the original colony, the essence of Roanoke remained tied to a single idea, something there was still broadcasting, refusing to be forgotten. What unnerves most is the continuity. From firelight in the 1600s to whispers in the 1800s to radio static in the 1900s, every age interprets the same phenomenon through its own language. Yet the thread remains the same, a signal, faint but persistent, echoing through time. So we must ask, if this is more than folklore, who is sending it? And if the message is not meant for us, then why does it continue to find us? By the middle of the 20th century, the whispers of Roanoke had transformed into something modern ears could no longer dismiss as folklore. Technology, for all its promise of clarity, began to pick up what older generations had only sensed in the wind. In 1945, a Coast Guard operator stationed near Hatteras Island recorded an unusual signal while scanning routine distress channels. The call came faintly, broken by static, but its pattern was unmistakable. 3 short bursts, then a pause, then 3 more. To any trained ear, it echoed the rhythm of a distress code. Coordinates matched waters near Roanoke, yet when patrol boats rushed to investigate, they found nothing. No vessel in trouble, no rafts, only the steady pulse of waves against the shore. Incidents like this became more common as radio expanded. Operators across the East Coast occasionally reported phantom calls emanating from coordinates near the island. Some described garbled voices that seemed to call names, syllables almost forming words before collapsing into static. Others spoke of rhythmic pulses as though someone were knocking from beneath the sea. The reports were scattered, unconfirmed, easy to dismiss as interference. But to those who heard them, the sensation was chilling. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit room, headphones pressed to your ears when a voice emerges from the noise. It is not loud.
It is not clear.
But it feels intentional, as if directed at you. For a moment, the gulf of centuries narrows, and the absence of an entire colony suddenly feels less like history and more like presence. Some researchers suggested atmospheric phenomena or misidentified transmissions from passing ships. But what unnerved operators was the consistency of location. Again and again, the signals originated near Roanoke, the very ground where silence was supposed to be absolute. One particularly unsettling account comes from 1953, when a ham radio enthusiast in Virginia claimed to intercept a transmission that repeated a single phrase, distorted but urgent. "We
Are here." He swore the voice was female, strained, breaking apart as if dragged underwater.
Though no recording survives, his written testimony insists the sound was unlike any interference he had encountered before. He refused to return to his equipment after dark. Whether these incidents were natural anomalies or something more, the effect was undeniable. Roanoke had become not just a mystery of the past, but an intrusion into the present. The so-called final signal was unfinished, a transmission caught between centuries, seeking receivers who could never truly respond. And here lies the haunting thought. Perhaps the signal was never meant to be answered. Perhaps it was never a call for help at all, but a message sealed into the fabric of the place itself, replaying endlessly, reaching whoever happened to listen, because if Roanoke's silence was complete, the radios should have been empty. Instead, they pulsed with fragments of something unresolved, proof that the colony's story had not ended, only changed its form. But what if these signals weren't rising from the air, but from beneath the waves? If the radios were hearing echoes, then perhaps the truth lay not above the water, but below it. For centuries, the seas around Roanoke have been restless, concealing sandbars, wrecks, and shifting shoals that earned the nickname the graveyard of the Atlantic. Yet, in recent decades, another phenomenon began to surface. Sound recorded beneath those same waters, strange and persistent, defying explanation. Naval sonar operators first noticed it during training exercises. In areas off the Carolina coast, sonar returned irregular pulses, rhythmic and deliberate, unlike the scatter of fish or the rolling thunder of waves. One diver described it as a heartbeat that wasn't mine, a steady thrum pressing through the ocean floor. Sometimes it stopped the moment they acknowledged it, resuming only when silence returned. Marine researchers later deployed hydrophones, devices designed to capture underwater acoustics. What they retrieved was unnerving. In the black water off Roanoke, microphones picked up low-frequency beats that repeated with uncanny precision. To the untrained ear, they sounded like drums muffled by distance. To others, it felt like communication, a signal attempting to travel, yet trapped beneath crushing depths. Divers who ventured closer often returned with stories they couldn't shake. They reported sudden disorientation, the sense of being surrounded by whispers despite being alone. Some swore they saw flickers of light beneath the seabed, as though campfires burned on the ocean floor. One diver refused to continue his work, insisting he heard children's laughter through his regulator. Impossible in the heavy silence of deep water, folklore, ever eager to intertwine with science, seized on these accounts. Locals claimed the colonists had not vanished but had been taken below, their voices now imprisoned in the waves themselves. Others believed the sea had become their instrument, carrying their unfinished message through pulses, echoes, and whispers distorted by salt and time. The legend grew. The island was not abandoned but inverted, its signal beating upward from beneath the surface. Skeptics argue these anomalies are natural, seismic activity, submarine interference, or the call of deep-sea creatures mistaken for rhythm. Yet skeptics cannot explain why the phenomena cluster so persistently near Roanoke, nor can they explain why for generations. The sounds always resembled something human: drums, voices, cries muffled by distance. The most haunting possibility is this: the colonists did not disappear, at least not entirely. Something transformed them, binding their presence to the land and sea. Their final signal may not be words at all, but a rhythm, a pulse encoded into the earth itself, replaying endlessly like a warning too vast for language. And if we accept that possibility, another question rises like a tide we cannot hold back. If the signal beneath the waves has endured for centuries, what or who has been listening to it all this time? When faced with the disappearance of over 100 men, women, and children, history has offered no shortage of explanations. Each theory seems convincing at first, yet each carries shadows that refuse to fade. And curiously, many of them, no matter how rational, circle back to the same unsettling thread: the idea of a final signal, a message imprinted on the land itself. The most conventional theory suggests the colonists sought refuge with the CROATOAN people, moving southward to survive. Archaeological finds hint at cultural blending, fragments of English tools alongside native artifacts. But if the colonists had assimilated, why did they leave no clear trail? Why carve a word into wood, then vanish without so much as a letter or a body? And if they survived peacefully, why would stories of phantom cries and drums persist for centuries after? Another possibility is starvation. Supplies were scarce, storms relentless, and isolation unforgiving. Perhaps desperation scattered the settlers into the wilderness. Yet even this theory fails to account for the eerie orderliness of the abandoned site. No signs of struggle, no evidence of panic. Hunger leaves chaos in its wake. Roanoke left stillness. Then there is conflict, with neighboring tribes or with each other. Some suggest bloodshed, yet no remains, no weapons, no scars of battle were ever uncovered. It is as though the earth itself swallowed the evidence whole. Beyond the historical, darker ideas take hold. Some whisper of disease, not ordinary sickness, but something strange carried through the swampy air, claiming lives with such efficiency that the survivors left nothing behind but echoes. Others lean into the supernatural. A curse laid upon the land, an ancient power awakened by intrusion. In these stories, the colonists did not merely die. They were transformed, their voices trapped in waves, their presence stitched into the rhythm of the island forever. More recently, theories have stretched even further. Could the settlers have witnessed something extraordinary? Lights in the sky, forces beyond comprehension, and attempted to signal it? Modern enthusiasts link the Roanoke mystery to patterns of unexplained phenomena across the world. Disappearances paired with sound, light, or cryptic messages. To them, the word carved into wood was not a destination, but a clue, a key to understanding an encounter too terrifying to record outright. What binds all these theories together is the silence that follows them. Every explanation leads to absence, to gaps where answers should be. And yet silence was never what witnesses described. Instead, they spoke of sound, cries in the wind, drums in the distance, pulses beneath the waves. Perhaps the colonists left no written record because their message was not meant for paper or stone. Perhaps it was encoded in rhythm, in firelight, in fragments that endure only when someone dares to listen. If so, then the so-called final signal was never an accident. It was intentional, a last attempt to communicate across time. And that realization shifts the question entirely. The mystery is not simply what happened to the colonists. The mystery is what they were trying to tell us before they disappeared. If the sounds and signals of Roanoke were not cries for help, then perhaps they were something far more unsettling. Warnings. For centuries, people assumed the colonists sought rescue, their voices carried on the wind, their fires lit in desperation. But what if the intent was not to invite others closer, but to drive them away? Consider the carving itself, CROATOAN, a single word, deliberate, etched with care. Was it a destination? Or was it a final attempt to leave a message, stripped down to what could be finished before something closed in? If the colony had uncovered a force beyond comprehension, perhaps their last act was to record the only clue they could, the whispers. The drumming, the phantom lights, each could be interpreted as a boundary marker, a line drawn between the living and a fate too terrible to repeat. Folklore among coastal tribes even spoke of forbidden grounds, places where spirits lingered, where the natural order bent. Roanoke, they warned, was such a place, yet the warnings went unheeded. Explorers treated the sounds as curiosities. Sailors told the stories as tavern tales. Even modern radio operators dismissed the signals as interference. Again and again, the message was ignored, not because it was unheard, but because it was too inconvenient to believe. And so the echoes continued, restless, unanswered. If the colonists sacrificed themselves to seal something away, the signal may be less about their survival and more about our caution, a barrier of sound and myth meant to keep others from repeating their mistake. But barriers fail, signals travel, and the mystery of Roanoke endures not because it is silent, but because it still speaks, softly, insistently, across time. The question we are left with is simple and chilling. What if the colonists did not vanish at all, but instead became the warning itself? Stand on the shores of Roanoke at night, and you will understand why the legend refuses to fade. The waves do not sound like ordinary surf. The wind carries tones that seem too deliberate to be random. Some swear that if you listen long enough, you can almost make out words hidden in the static of the sea. The colony may have vanished from sight, but its presence lingers in sensation, in stories passed through centuries, in unexplained transmissions, in the rhythmic pulses recorded beneath the waves. History books close the chapter with silence, yet the land itself insists otherwise. The final signal has never truly stopped. It waits, patient and persistent, reaching whoever dares to hear it. Perhaps it was a plea, perhaps it was a warning, or perhaps it was something stranger still, a message not meant for us at all. And tonight,
As you close your eyes, ask yourself, when the wind rattles your window,
or when the silence of the night is interrupted by something faint, something rhythmic, are you sure it isn't Roanoke?
still broadcasting, still calling across the centuries?